We're going to spend the next 25 minutes talking about Gen Z marketing and how marketing kind of has been failing. So, I mean, look, Gen Z, they grew up with TikTok, they group chats, algorithm-fed culture. They crave authenticity and community, but marketing often turns them off because it's just not those things. So we've got some amazing CEOs, marketers, people have been doing this for a long time, people who are building the apps that talk to Gen Z where they are. And I want to start off with each of you guys, and I'm going to go, Casey, I'll start with you, and then Teddy and Alice. When you think about brands working with Gen Z, what's the biggest mistake brands are making today?
Yeah, well, Jim, thank you so much for hosting today. When I think about what brands are doing wrong with Gen Z, first off, for everyone here, I was born in the year 2000. I'm 24 years old, and social media really came into my world when I was 13, 14. And I think one of the biggest things that I've recognized with brands that have spoken to me over the years are founder-led, and you see that more than ever with the rise of the personal brand, and some of the biggest brands that I believe Gen Z relates to are the founder-led brands. Look at Mr. Beast, for example, Feastables. When kids see chocolate on the shelf and they see a Feastables, they think of Mr. Beast. When you see a Hershey's bar, you don't really think of anyone. And I think the biggest brands, such as Prime, such as Feastables, are that founder-led brand image, which I believe Gen Z really resonates with.
But what about the other brands? What about the ones that are out there? They've been in business for 40 years, 30 years, 20 years. Give me why don't they do it the way Jimmy does, the way that other creators do? Why does it still feel so brain dead?
I think it's like the difference of a startup and a big corporation is, startups, you can move fast, you can test things. And yes, do the big companies try to do that? Sure. But I really do believe that, the Mr. Beast, the Logan Pauls, these examples that I'm referencing, they just get culture 1,000 times more than what these big companies do. And even if they try and they have 10 times the budget, you'll see Mr. Beast do a fake mustache photo and get 100 times the impressions on social this past week. And it's just a different culture. And I think it's a learning curve that, I think these big companies, which they're starting to do now, are like bringing in full-time in-house creators to really, try to build that founder-led image.
Yep, absolutely. And we will definitely, that's why we're here, by the way. Teddy, you're out there building an app that talks to Gen Z all day long in college and other places. How about you? What do you think the biggest mistake that marketers are making?
Yeah, I think brands and marketers, they're just not close enough to Gen Z. They don't actually understand the consumer. So basically, I've spent the past 3 years going to over 200 college campuses building the app that US college students use. And in my experience with 10,000 college students, it basically goes to show that these companies are too corporate. These companies come off as really cringy. If you go to a campus, you'll meet somebody who's a Bumble ambassador, and they'll be like, oh yeah, I get to give out merch, and I get to do these bar events where we give a ton of alcohol to students and all of that. But then you ask them, do you use Bumble? They'll be like, no, I use Hinge. What are you talking about? And that just goes to show that these companies are not close to the consumer. They don't actually understand what makes someone love their product, what makes someone love their brand. And I've seen so many companies do this. Red Bull would be another great example. Red Bull is a company that will send a car to a campus and have ambassadors who will give endless free things to other people. But in reality, Celsius is absolutely clocking Red Bull on college campuses. So be closer to the users, be closer to the consumers, and you're going to win.
Alice, you've been helping companies and brands for at least the last 2 or 3 generations of technology that we've been to. I mean, the PC industry when it was all about mainframe computers. Web 1, when there were blogs, there were things, there were mommy blogs, and a lot of the packaged goods companies didn't get it. And then Facebook came out, and they're like, what? People talk to each other? What do you see brands doing today that kind of feels like trying to deal with mommy blogs 20 years ago? Okay, I am, but let's just say. Although you were working at Sony, I think, when we met, right? Yeah, so, Sony did PCs.
Find out, ask them. They have the answers, right? And I talked to my son's girlfriend, and I was like, what is it that really turns you off? And she's like, I just eye roll when I see influencers being paid a ton of money, because it makes me think the product's terrible. Like, if they have to pay someone to say something nice about the product, like, what's wrong with it? And so I think part of it is that these brands are just trying too hard, and they're not going to the source and saying, well, what's meaningful to you? Like, what do you value in your life, right? We hear a lot about, like, product market fit and like value proposition, but the notion of value proposition is that you are proposing a value to someone else, and in fact, you should be asking them, what do you find valuable?
Yeah, I want to talk about this research that Microsoft did. It came out probably about 6 months ago. I sort of figured this was the case, but they really went out and talked to Gen Z and found it out. It was that they talked to Gen Z, and about 50% of them belong to a fandom, they're a fan of something that no one in their friend group knows anything about. This is a very different behavior from even 15 years ago. Teddy, you're out building an app. A lot of it is, are fandoms and friend groups and things like that. How do you feel about those fandoms becoming so dispersed, and it's so different from what we saw maybe even 10 years ago?
Yeah, I'd say there's sort of a difference between the idea of being interested in the same thing and being part of more of a cultural movement. I think all of this generation is part of a cultural movement that makes them gravitate towards certain things, whether that's like Dave Portnoy and Barstool, or whether that's like cool influencers and athletes that they're interested in, or whatever it might be. I think everybody, while their interests and fandoms might be kind of dispersed, is following a pretty similar cultural trend on college campuses across America. I see this everywhere from, the Yales, and I went to Stanford, the Stanfords of the world, all the way to like Howard University and Langston University and Abilene Christian and everything in between. No matter what campus you go to, Gen Z's grown up natively on social media. Gen Z's grown up natively with brands trying to constantly get their attention, and certain brands do it well, and they're one with the consumer. I'm a big believer that there's really no such thing as marketing. It's all about growth. You need to be one with the consumer, not, artificially promote. And if you can tap into that cultural trend with Gen Z, you're onto something.
Yeah, Alice, how do you see brands dealing with this fractured fandom where it's not just like, oh, this person, except for maybe Mr. Beast, appeals to everybody, and how do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is really important to note that individualism, being individualistic, is very important to this demographic. Now, and also, we shouldn't talk about them like they're all the same. Like,
right.
Everyone is different, but there are, there's collectives, as you say, of folks that share an interest. Korean skincare, for example, but when you push them on, like, can you tell me which brands you love? They're not really focused on that. They're like, it might be, something that is doing something for them, and they're like, maybe there's snail trails on your face. I don't know. And they'll follow others that are doing, similar activities, but it's not that kind of like same. They're not in a herd.
Right. It's not a herd mentality. Yeah. Casey, you've been doing podcasting for a long time. You're actually speaking on podcasting on this stage on Friday.
Yes.
I looked at like Spotify as their top 100, and we just saw YouTube come out with their top 100. And I looked at them. First of all, the podcasts on each one's top 100s are very different, which is fascinating. But there's not a lot of mass market podcasts out there. Think about the fact that if you're a fan of a podcast, like Fantasy Footballers, I'm a big fan. None of you have ever heard of it. But it seems like it's very fractured. There are all these different smaller fandoms around these different podcasts. But overall, these podcasts are huge. Talk about the dichotomy between a smaller podcast with a huge fan base and how marketers can and should be leaning in there.
Absolutely. So first off, as Jim said, I've hosted my own podcast since 2017. I started it when I was 17 years old in high school. Podcasting was by no means what it is today as this big medium. And, fun story, I was in London last week at an event called the Podcast Show
I heard
London,
a lot about it. I heard it was good.
they were talking a lot about the future of podcasting, what that means for brands, what that means for creators. And I think the idea of this industry, podcasting, being so fragmented is what created the first big movement in podcasting of some people were doing video, some were doing just audio, some were doing both. And if you look at the biggest podcast creators, brands in the space, things like Joe Rogan, Call Her Daddy, but it's someone like Call Her Daddy, Alex Cooper, and the IP that she's built around not only her show, but the network she's built within Unwell. I believe that, and a fun story that I think is super relevant to this question is, in 2019, I was 19 years old, and I was the last person to sit down with the legendary Larry King. He was 87 years old, and there was this massive age gap, and he was 87 years old, just coming off of a stroke, and he was just starting his podcast that was going to be called The Millionth Question. I'm asking him, like, why are you doing this? And he was talking about a lot of the brands and the advertisers that we've worked with on air all these years are putting so much money into podcasting, and this industry is changing, and we all need to evolve with the space. And I think one of the things that brands are sometimes naive about is they're like, is podcasting too overdone? Is it too saturated? Is it too fragmented? It's a hard medium, and I believe that if someone like Larry King that was on TV for all these years can test a medium and still be so interested about where the puck is moving, brands should start testing with many things. I think as a brand, you should be your founder executive team should be going on podcasts to have that founder-driven brand storytelling. 2, you should be, even like aggregating shows and maybe even building an internal podcast network. You see companies like HubSpot buying media companies and building out the HubSpot podcast network, and there's case study about how their organic lead gen tripled just from having these top business podcasts leading to their top of funnel. So I think going on shows, starting your own shows, and also testing with advertising on podcasts, not just the big ones, but small ones that really have that niche community, whether that's 1,000 listeners, 5,000 listeners, or sometimes even 100 listeners. There's so many gems out there with niche communities that really make a big impact.
Well, so it's interesting you talk about these smaller communities, because a lot of the podcasts and creators that are doing a good job are building their own private communities. Like the one I talked about, they've got a huge Discord, it's private.
Yeah.
There are all these other ones that are building private communities, and even Gen Z, more and more, moving away from Instagram, moving away from TikTok and other places that are public, and hanging out more in private communities, whether it's WhatsApp, group chats, Discord, other stand groups. How as a marketer, and Alice, I want to start with you, how as a marketer can you build trust and go into these private communities to talk to these audiences in a way that feels natural and not just come in and spray your message around and leave?
I mean, I don't think you should go in unless you're invited. And I also think that if you're going to go in, it shouldn't be someone like me talking to an audience that I don't resonate with because I'm not part of their peer group. And so I really like the point you were making about being, telling founder stories. It really has to feel like that they're attracted towards you, not that you promote out to them. And we can't really intrude on those private conversations. I think the best you could hope for is to be included as a topic of their conversation, but are you going to be in the room with them? I mean, I've been doing a lot around decentralized media over the last few months. And it's exactly what you're talking about in terms of, people want privacy, but it's not privacy like it's locked down and nobody can see and it's all bits and bytes. It's like, I want to have a one-on-one conversation, or I want to have a one-on-four conversation. I mean, my son is ready to just get a burner phone. Like they don't want to live publicly like that. So I think you have to find a way to resonate. There has to be that, I hate this word now, it's overused, but the authenticity, like you have to matter to their everyday life. And then if you're lucky, they will become an advocate for you amongst their peer group,
Yeah, I find there's a big sense of trust around people just like me, not sort of this broad celebrity or anything like that. Looking for meaning, not mass.
Yeah.
Teddy, what you're building is very much around private communities, around anonymity. Talk about how brands have done a good job coming into spaces that you're building, if they have, to build trust. Who's doing a good job, and what are they doing to try and build that trust out?
Yeah, so I think the companies that do the best in reaching Gen Z are the ones who are open to hearing from Gen Z how to actually reach them. So in terms of my platform, I built the social platform that college students use, and they use it for everything from parties, classes, memes, jokes, whatever it might be on campuses. And it's really their one-stop shop. It's the place they trust. It's a private community, like you said, only people who they share a common experience with. I think hyperlocality, I think privacy, I think intimacy, it's all incredibly important. So when brands come in to try to reach our users, and we do run ads, and we work with brands like Perplexity or like Kalshi or Quizlet or other brands that want to reach college students, when they do best is when they say, well, you guys have been to college campuses. I've been to over 200 college campuses. How would you go reach these users? What's going to make them trust us? And we do everything from giving users Perplexity Pro to giving users Quizlet Plus. And these brands have really successful campaigns, anywhere from 3 to 18% CTR on our platform, compared to 0.25% on Instagram or TikTok or whatever it might be. And it's because it comes from our team. It says Fizz Team at the top. It's really synergistic with the users. So if we're bringing them an academic tool, we're not going to say, like, this will help you on your finals. We'll say, like, we want to help y'all get that 4.0. Like, that's what we're trying to help you guys do, because we understand what the users want to hear, what they want to see. And when brands have that open mindset, when brands are trying to be one with the consumer, they do really well. And we see that on our platform, too.
So, Casey, how have you seen brands earn their way in and really creating value in these really invisible spaces?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll take the podcast lens, and I love what you just said about like trust and trusting your platform. And I think, I've interviewed 500 plus founders on my show over the years, from the founders of Netflix to the founders of Twitch, and this idea of marketing to Gen Z, as someone who is Gen Z, comes up a lot. And I remember sitting down with the founder of a supplement brand called Momentous Supplements, and his name's Jeff. We're talking, and I asked him, like, how has podcasting played a role in like your go-to-market strategy? And and I think this is where like this idea of testing comes in big time, where he ended up meeting Andrew Huberman, one of the biggest health and fitness podcasts in the world right now, and has been for a while. But he met Andrew, I believe, like 3-5 years ago, and Andrew really built a love for his product and became like a hyper evangelist. And as he grew, I remember Jeff said it public in the podcast. He's like, yeah, I can contribute like $0 to $80 million in revenue year 2 or 3 from podcast specific advertising and partnerships through Huberman. And I think this idea of trust, like, Gen Z is sick of the paid ads, not talking to them. They want to hear from people they trust. And that's why I think podcast advertising has grown so much over the years, is because the ones who do it the best, the people that love the products they're promoting, the people that organically talk about it, like Huberman, like, he will not promote something that he doesn't really believe in, whether that's 8 Sleep, whether that's Momentous, whether that's, AG1. And I think, as you mentioned on your platform, like, people trust your platform because it's coming from you, and they trust you to understand who they are, the vibe of college campuses, how they're being spoken to. And I think the same goes with podcasting, and brands can kind of take a page from the book of podcasts of like, how do we appear the most transparent and trustworthy to our customer and find where they're hanging out.
Yeah, and trust is so hard to get, and you get it in little drips and drabs, and it's so easy to lose. You're going to lose it in a tidal wave. I want to move on to another thing that brands are being told. You need to be a creator, right? You got to do this. You got to be a creator. And one of the examples I love is Duolingo. How many of you are fans of the Duolingo bird out there?
Oh, yeah.
Big fan of the bird, right? But I wonder, and look, they do an amazing job, but does every brand need to have their own bird? Alice, what do you think? When you talk to brands, you go to them and say, if you don't have your own mascot, if it's not the bird, or who's the Canucks mascot? I forget. But if it's not one of those, you're dead. Is that a thing that brands are resonating with, or are they like, nope, I'm not doing that?
I mean, again, you can't force anything, right? It has to fit with like the mission of the company. Is it authentic to the narrative? Does it resonate with what the product is and how people are using it? And I think there is a trap you can fall into of like, chasing the meme or chasing the trend. And really you want to be setting trends if you can. And again, you do that by understanding like who you're serving and what you're bringing to them on a day-to-day basis,
Yep.
I think it just has to be more organic than forced.
Teddy, does everyone need a bird?
I think on that note, authenticity is what matters.
Right.
So Duolingo, they've built an incredible brand. I think it's rare that they've got a bird and that worked. I think most companies are not going to see that. But when you look at other brands that have been built, I used the example of Dave Portnoy earlier in Barstool. Barstool built this brand around him doing pizza reviews. He didn't think pizza reviews were going to be like the thing. But then he went and ate pizza, which he loves doing, and it became like the most viral thing with Gen Z. And it just worked. So go and test things, go experiment, be authentic, do things that people think are cool, and it will maybe work. But don't try too hard. You got to be authentic about it.
Don't push it. That's such good advice.
Yeah.
Such good advice. Casey, what about you? We all need our birds, or we're just like, no, be yourself?
You know, there's something that really stuck with me is my last company was a company called Media Kits, and one of our investors was Wiz Khalifa and his manager, Will DeZombach, and one of their biggest investments was a company, Liquid Death. And I remember we were kind of talking about this topic of like, brands need something to stand for. And I believe a huge part of like what Wiz and Will and like they were talking about in the early days of Liquid Death were like this idea of counterculture, like something so simple like water. Like how do you build a love and affinity? It's okay, we're gonna make the cans bigger, we're gonna make them wider, we're gonna make it look like beer. And it's like giving something for people to stand for or to fall in love with, like this anti-counterculture angle, I think is not obviously the same as a mascot and a bird, but I think it's in that same vein of like building a movement and building evangelists around what you stand for, whether that's a mascot or a feeling overall.
You know what else they did was they noticed a trend and jumped on it, which was really smart, that less people going to bars wanted to drink alcohol, but water just like remember the old water bottles? They just look like junk, and they said, we're gonna make it look like beer, put it in a cool thing so that when you're drinking it, people don't know you're not drinking.
Yeah.
That also is an example of a brand jumping on a trend early and really leaning into it. We have about 5 minutes left, and I want to do a brand lightning round here. So I'm going to throw out a brand. I'm going to ask each of you in turn. You can all raise your hand, or I'm going to call on you. And let me know if what they're doing is resonating or missing with Gen Z. Let's start off with, you know what? I want to start off with Feastables. Feastables, doing it or missing? I kind of know the answer.
I mean, I have a 9-year-old niece and 2 cousins who are 15, 16. And I gotta say, I've never heard the word Feastables more in my life than from my cousins and my niece. Just in terms of if you're walking down the aisle or if you say chocolate, it's what do you want? It's Feastables.
Cool.
So
Teddy,
yeah, they're doing great.
Feastables. Are they doing it or not?
I think they're doing it. I don't know that it's with Gen Z. I think it's with the next generation. But
Alpha, right? Yeah.
I think they're doing it. Yeah, and it's working.
Feastables, Alice.
I think I'm out of the loop on this one.
All right, what about, let's talk about Prime. Prime Hydration from our friends, the creators, KSI and Logan Paul. Is it Logan or Jake Paul? I can't remember. Prime, what do you think?
Again,
Not a Prime fan.
I mean, I'm just maybe operating in a different sphere.
Okay, Prime.
Prime did a good job for like 12 days, and then people realized it was disgusting and stopped. But I guess brand-wise, they did well for a period of time.
Okay, Prime.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that I think there's been like, about the product itself, but I think you can't deny like year 1, year 2, $2 billion sales, and kids are treating these like rare sports cards. It's like they have the LA Lakers collab. Let me go find that bottle and drink it and keep it in my bedroom. And I think that's just undeniably there. That is why they've like nearly outperformed things like Gatorade, Powerade in terms of just yearly revenue over the past 3-5 years.
All right, Alice, pick a brand you think is doing a good job.
With Gen Z?
Yeah, with Gen Z. Who's crushing it?
You know, I asked this question of the Gen Zers in my life, and they struggle to give me
Isn't that wild? Yeah.
They really couldn't. They could tell me like a product, but not the name. Like they're not attached to names.
What do you think TikTok did right?
In terms of
reaching this Gen Z audience and really activating with them.
I mean, it's really fast. I mean, attention is very, very hard to hold, and it's there, and it's the next one and the next one. But again, I mean, like the Gen Zers I'm around, like are trying to not be on their devices. So, I think there's a real mix of what's going on.
All right, what do you think about TikTok, Teddy?
It's an entertainment platform. They've done a good job building an entertainment platform that engages people all over the world. I think in terms of brands that I think have done really well, I think Poppy and Celsius would be the two that come to mind. Poppy by teaming
Yeah, talk
up.
about Poppy. I mean, I'm gonna interrupt you for a minute because they're also on my list. Poppy did great, and then they started giving away soda machines to creators right before the Super Bowl, and it fell apart for them.
But
then they sold for zillions, so it must have worked.
That's the thing. So like people were writing articles like, oh my God, they did vending machines. It was so out of touch. No one cared about that. All that people cared was that Alex Earl was like posting about drinking Poppy. So at the end of the day, brands resonate very differently from the people who are writing the articles about them than the people who are actually consuming. And I think Celsius is the same way. Most like millennials might think, you know, like Monster, Red Bull, or one of these companies. Well, Celsius is teaming up with popular influencers and athletes on campuses, sometimes like micro athletes, people who are not that well known nationally, and they're doing a great job. And if you ask anybody, like, what's your alternative to coffee on campuses, they'll say Celsius for the most part. Yeah.
So last one, anybody want to pick on one of the brands like CeraVe or Nike? How about Nike? Like, Nike seems to go up and down, right? Anybody have a point of view on what Nike's doing right or wrong? Go ahead. Jason.
I think they're doing things right, and there's a funny short story. One of my friends, he's known as @Charlie on Instagram, and he went sort of viral, and I helped him with this back in 2018. He put out this fan-made Nike commercial where he was overweight, and then he went out to go run a marathon and an Ironman, and he made this very cinematic video, and at the end it said, "Insert Nike logo here." And we ran a lot of Facebook ads to it towards like Beaverton, Oregon, where Nike's headquartered. Long story short, this video gets like 5 million views. And again, this is 2018. And flies Charlie out to the Nike headquarters and does this whole campaign around him. And he ends up in a commercial with LeBron James, Serena Williams, Colin Kaepernick. And it was this creator-led series that influenced the whole movement around like be your own athlete. And, you know, at what scale was that campaign successful? You know, I don't have things to point to, but from a personal experience, I think brands like Nike, like they will like dive in and really showcase things that stick out that are in this creator ecosystem, and I think they're doing great.
Cool, okay, so real quickly, 20 seconds each. One thing that marketers should either start doing or stop doing right now. I'll start with you. One thing they should start doing or stop doing.
I think marketers should convince CEOs, executive teams to go be on more podcasts. You see some of the biggest CEOs, Howard Schultz going on Acquired, which is one of the biggest business podcasts, and you should do that for the CEO and all executives to really tell that story from the top down.
Get the CEO to tell their stories. Teddy, one thing they should start or stop.
Stop being cringy, stop being corporate, start getting closer to the consumer.
So lean into your consumers. And then Alice, take us home. One thing to start or stop.
First going to say Liquid IV. That is the one product that my
Liquid IV.
That's the one product my son talks about. And yeah, it has to be just like being, like talking from being a real person.
Yeah, talk from the heart, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, go for trust and talk from the heart. Alice, Teddy, Casey, thank you very much. Thank you all. Thank you, Web Summit.
Thank you.
And enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you, everyone.